But anyway, we'll see.
But I, just to be clear though,
And Adam said.
Okay, members, it's now 5:30 p.m. and I will open this meeting. Just draw your attention to the fact that the meeting is being streamed live and recorded as well. I just begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, pay our respects to their elders past and present, and we extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples here today. I think we've got those present listed in attendance as well. Mayor Santos currently on leave of absence, and we don't have anybody absent from the chamber other than that. We do have an initial procedural matter to deal with, and that is to elect a chair as the first order of business. That person will chair the meeting until such time as the initial paper under the CEO report, has been a late paper to elect the deputy mayor, is discussed and decided upon. So it's just for the first part of the meeting. So I'll open it to you, elected members. I'm happy to take your advice on how you'd like to handle that. I'm also happy to take nominations. Without to you. I'm going to share from amongst those of you guys here.
I'm happy to nominate Councillor Elliott.
So seconded to that nomination. Councillor Trenberg. Are there any other nominations for the floor? That being the case, I see a show of hands, please. Councillor, thank you. Councillor Elliott, happy to take the chair. Relating to item 3.
So we can move on to item 2 of the agenda, minutes of the previous meeting. For you, the recommendation is that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 11th of January 2022 be confirmed as a correct record. Would someone like to move that way? Hannah, the seconder. Thank you. Moving on to item 2.2, minutes of a special meeting held on the 13th of January, which you would have been given the minutes for. The recommendation is that the minutes of the special meeting held on the 13th of January 2022 be confirmed as a correct record. You will not move that way, Lizzie? As a seconder to that motion. Thanks, Hannah. All those in favour? Now, item 3.0 is declaration of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest for the items that are in the agenda? Hannah?
I have a perceived declaration of interest for item 13.41. My partner works for the business of Curtis's, and your name is for business. So I will be remaining in the meeting.
Do you have any other declarations of interest?
Yes, no, I have material declaration of interest in the same item. Yeah, I'll get into the director of a couple of income employees. I will, yes.
Can I stress about the procedure? We've been given forms to fill in the conflict of interest statements, which should be lodged with the Secretary of Approval. Those forms be lodged?
Moving on, no other declaration of interest. 4.0, deferred motion, there's none. Move on. Yeah, gone to 5.0, the acting mayor's report. Move on to the deputation. So I'd like to welcome Peter and Jay, I have that right? From CH4, thinking about
Asparagoxus.
asparagus, which was
Yep.
spoke earlier that, I had the opportunity to see Landline on Sunday. It was very interesting. So I really look forward to hearing your presentation today. I'll just remind you that there's sort of 10 minutes allowed for.
Understood. Thank you, Chair. Members, CEO. My name is Peter Lau. I'm a consultant for the company CH4 Australia. Jay Dent's agriculture manager for CH4 Australia, and the purpose of the meeting today, or our presentation today, is really to say hello to the members and council, and to alert council that CH4 Australia is pursuing a tenure in agriculture zone off the coast of Bundy Harbour. So we've gone out and done C4 surveys. We're in the process of having that site assessed. We'll probably have to move some of that site due to the seafloor characteristics, but that's probably a tip to the process that the environmental assessment is rigorous. And it's really just open the communication channels between council and the company moving forward. So with that in mind, may as well understand more about CH4, which is Jay's.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for the opportunity to come and present to you today. For those who haven't twigged yet, CH4 is a chemical composition of methane. So CH4's mission is to impact climate change and to do that in a hurry. The emissions from cattle or livestock as a whole, about 15% of global greenhouse emissions, and methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases. It's about 28 times worse than carbon dioxide. So it's seen as something that can be actioned immediately with immediate effect. So the Asparagoxus seaweed is native to South Australia and other parts of the world, including New Zealand. But many different species of seaweed were trialled, and Asparagoxus was found by far to be the most effective. So there's halogenated diamines, which are produced naturally within the plant, and they, when ingested, have an impact on the enzyme activity of bacteria involved in the digestion in ruminants, and it effectively prevents them from producing the methane gas, which is belched out of the cattle in huge quantities. So the entire plant is used once it's freeze-dried and turned into a powder. There's no extractions or additions to it. It's been proven to reduce methane by up to 90%, with just 0.5% of the diet being replaced. It does depend a little bit on the quality of the material and how much of the active ingredient is retained within processing. It's also been tested to see if there was any residues that could be found in the meat or the other products from cattle, including dairy, and so it's been proven to be very safe. In addition to the greenhouse gas reductions, it also improves feed conversion efficiency. So by not losing all this methane to the atmosphere, the cow is more efficient in the feed that it's consuming. So this all started with a guy in it was Prince Edward Island in Canada. He was a fifth generation cattle farmer, and he noticed that the cows that went down to the beach and ate the seaweed were healthier and grew better. And since then, research has been conducted by different organisations around the world. The CSIRO, down in conjunction with James Cook University, investigated many seaweeds, and initially when they saw the results from the Asparagopsis, they couldn't believe it because the reduction was so immense, and so they had to redo the trial a number of times before they actually believed it. As mentioned, it's a very small quantity that needs to go to each cow each day, but the difficult part is that there's 1.5 billion cattle on the earth today. So growing enough of this product to get it to as many cattle as possible is the challenge. So this depicts the process. So step one is providing seedlings to be planted onto ropes or into ponds. The business model that's depicted here involves finding contractors who would be interested in growing the product. So they'd be provided with the seed stock and the know-how to grow it. How the seaweed's treated post-harvest is very important for how much of the active ingredient remains. And so CH4 would provide that know-how to ensure that as much of the bromines are maintained as possible. CSIRO license this technology, given that they did the research, and so CH4 is a license holder for this. And at the other end, companies who have a carbon emission issue can buy carbon credits in exchange through a system that I don't fully understand, but that's not my end of the business. So the first challenge is going to be to grow at scale. It has been farmed and is farmed in other parts of the world, but at quite a small scale. It's a very fragile seaweed, so with kelp farming, the plant's very strong. You can pull it right out of the water to process it. With this seaweed, it's very fragile, it fragments, so you've got to be careful about how you handle it. So yeah, the first hurdle is going to be growing at scale and then processing at scale. Currently, freeze drying is the third method to maintain as much of the active as possible, but we expect that that'll evolve into a more scalable and efficient process as we learn more. And then, of course, the next challenge is getting it into the mouths of cattle. It's something that's easy to do in a dairy or a feedlot, much more challenging in a pasture situation. So currently, we're sort of in the pilot phase where we're doing work in tanks and at sea at small areas, small scopes. In the coming year, we intend to move on to upscaling both the tank culture and the at sea culture. So, for instance, the biggest tanks that's been grown in currently are around 20,000 litres. We plan this year to go up to 1.8 million litres. And then from next year onwards, we're looking to further increase the scale at which it's produced. So in Port Lincoln, we have a lease application which is pending for a site within Boston Bay. Asparagopsis does well in areas of high nutrients, so situating it close to finfish aquaculture is advantageous, and of course it also reduces the eutrophication of the coastal waters and improves water quality. Sorry, jump one there. We've also got a lease application pending for Louth Bay, which is also adjacent to a kingfish farm. These are both on that sort of pilot scale, and then scaling up, we're looking to apply for a lease in the Tumby Bay southern sector, and that's a much larger lease. It's 800 hectares. As Peter mentioned, the criteria for finding an appropriate growing space is that the benthic substrate needs to not contain seagrass or any other
Significant
habitat. That's right, thanks Peter. So they did find some, in the videos that we took, there were some merle beds which need to be avoided, so we're having to go back and do some more video forensics to identify some more suitable areas.
Sorry, can you go back, Joe? conscious of time a little bit. You can see this is the aquaculture zone, that green area, that's already in place. So that was approved maybe 8 years ago, thereabouts. So this smaller section here, as you can see the arrow, that is what we're looking at. We looked at that area across there, but the significant habitats is down in that area, so we're trying to avoid that. So at this point, we need to go back to resurvey. So it's at that point now, really, in terms of the process for here. The company's headquarters is where, Joe?
So the headquarters are in America. So Steve Miller is the CEO. He actually grew up in Adelaide and went to University of Adelaide, but he's currently living in Las Vegas, which was a surprise to me because he's got a huge beard like ZZ Top, and it's the last place I thought he'd live. But
and so communications would be through,
yeah,
so it's an Australian branch of the company.
So CH4 Australia is based in Adelaide, so the headquarters are in Adelaide at Tonsley at the old Mitsubishi car manufacturing site. And I'll speak with Adam Main, the GM, about the preferred route for any inquiries, it'll either be to me or directly to himself. The gap that's between these two sectors was left for the passage of vessels out to the group. So there wouldn't be too many interactions there.
And so, sorry, just to jump in again, the purpose of this meeting, really, that zone's already in effect. So there's not much in terms of the consultation that the site can't be, out here or out here. It's going to be in that zone. So that's the established part. All we're trying to do is just to establish the communication with council and constituents. If there are any other major concerns around this happening, and just establish a communication branch to the company so that when we start operating, that issues can be resolved quickly and appropriately. Fair, Joe?
Yep, thank you. So this sort of depicts a typical way in which the algae would be grown. Similar to mussels, we have a backbone between floats and then droppers with the algae growing on that. This illustration shows how it would look. So loops of rope not touching the bottom of the sea to increase the amount of area that the algae can grow on. Suspended between floats to attach to concrete or
Which is pretty consistent with how mussel sites are set up.
And this one just shows it from a different view. So typically the lines will be about 20 metres apart and about 700 metres long.
The bit that we don't want to concern people with is the depth of that dropper at this point. I mean, that looks like a curtain, but it's a case of we've got to work out what's the sensible depth.
That's my question. So
Yeah.
what depth are they suspended underwater?
So it depends on the species. So there's two different species of Asparaginopsis. There's one which prefers cold water, which is Armada, and the Taxiformis prefers the warmer water. And so they have different requirements for light, and we're still working out what the best depth is. All right, and in terms of processing the product, we're in talks with the Cleve Council, who have been very keen for us to locate the processing facility in their council area. So the current concept is that all the material grown in the Spencer Gulf will go there for processing.
Okay. Oh, God.
And that is the
That's
last
fine.
one.
Got time for just a couple of questions before we connect with that now.
Yeah, fine.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so those lease zones in other areas around the world where you're using this, are they no-go zones for boats, or is there still passage allowed over the top?
So typically you're allowed to go through the zone, but where there's a lease inside the zone, it's got
Exclusive occupation.
shore markers. Yeah, you're not allowed to go in, although by arrangement, sectors like commercial fishing can be given permission in circumstances.
Because if I look at the map up there, like, yachts sailing on this, they have specific angles they can travel on.
Yes.
And, yeah, it's quite restrictive what was up there, I would have thought, for sailing traffic. Is that an issue you could counter elsewhere?
No.
So I guess Port Lincoln have similar sort of arrangements, and at times there have been collisions, but not the sailing boat that I know of, not a towboat that's go through. It's just a failure of navigation.
So we've been in communication with fisheries, Pleasant Fisheries, to understand some of the stakeholders in that area. we've had discussions with the sardine sector as well as the prawn fishers. They seem to be the main users interacting in that area. But haven't taken on any other feedback. I haven't heard of so I must admit.
I guess,
Oh, if there's a predominant wind direction, your angles are quite limited.
Yeah.
It takes you quite a narrow passageway when the groups is a fair draw card for our region.
Yeah.
Voting stuff.
yep.
Just an observation as a starter, I thought I'd go away.
Yep.
Yeah, you mean sort of through there or?
Yeah.
So travelling down to Lincoln perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that would, as I say, as Jay mentioned, that was the intention of that.
And
Through the middle, but.
instead of one turn or two turns, you'd probably do about 20 turns and not slowly to get up that passage.
I guess in some ways the presence of the seagrass has helped that slightly because instead of being able to have a lease that comes out to here, it's likely to be longer and skinnier to provide a bit more room through there. But, you know, we'd be happy to hear any feedback about where the preferred location would be from the community.
Yeah, well, I guess if, like I said, if the boys floats are suspended below the water and a depth doesn't affect it, it's redundant.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that though.
Yeah, depending on the depth of the keel and the boat, we
Yeah.
probably need to be going around, not through.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, we can't.
Yeah.
Very interesting topic, and, it's great to have the opportunity to do something about the greenhouse gases and working towards that. I think we'd probably like to have a processing plant around
Yes.
the area too.
Yes,
Well, that's a conversation, I'm sure. Adelaide would be glad to have.
and I think that'll develop as we develop the site, the servicing as well. At this point, it's planned before thinking, but again, that's vessels and whatnot. So it's really an ongoing conversation, but we just wanted to start. So it's early in the piece.
Thank you so much, Peter and Jay, and look forward to hearing some more information.
Thank you, Jed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on now to 7.0, community delegate representative report. Does anyone, any elected members have any report? Things probably for January. Yeah. The next one, no elected members report, go on to questions on notice, that's what you're Councillor Randall's question on notice, which has been responded to by the officer. Not sure whether there's any other comments from any officer.
Yes, so I've got one comment to make. In preparing the response, the 1.29 million which is listed in the second section, basically that represented the amount of money that was in the capital budget that was actually shifted to operating. However, I think because these details will be going in the minutes, obviously, we probably need to change that operating cost to a full operating cost because there was budgeted operating cost as well for that project. And that then changes that figure to 2.13. So in other words, the full cost of the project was more like about 4.9 million, of which it was about 2.74 of capital and 2.13 operating. But the adjustment that's referred to was more in particular to that 1.29.
I'd like to comment on the basis that I submitted the question on notice, because people are asking me, when they read the council comparison website, they see council rates generated and council rates spent, and there's $1.5 million deficit. And I asked the question, what was the reason or reasons for this deficit? If the same people in the community read the answer, I don't think they're going to any better understanding of the depth of it. So I'm disappointed with the answer.
Not sure about what more information I can possibly.
Simple information.
Okay, so all this information is actually available in our client plan.
Yeah, sure. And we signed up for this council, so thanks.
And we have signed.
Don't have an issue. Just want a simple answer.
Thank you. All right, we will move on. Questions without notice. Are there any? Yeah. Do we have any questions from members without notice? Councillor Randall?
when we had an agenda item looking at our policy and rating, and I moved a motion with some requests for scenarios to be produced. I was encouraged not to move the motion, but to see provide the scenarios. There are still a number of scenarios outstanding, which I've not had any answers to. I'm just wondering when those scenarios might be forthcoming.
As I explained at that meeting, there are scenarios that we can't provide. We're not actually, have the tools to provide those scenarios. So we've provided you those scenarios that we can. Any further scenarios would actually have to outsource to somebody that's qualified and has the ability to put those together.
Well, having read,
Yeah.
having read, I wasn't at the meeting, but having read the information, there's also not enough detail there for me to even be able to anticipate what's being asked for in some instances. Like in one instance, it asked for 2 scenarios with 2 different groupings of rating, but there's no direction on what percentage can be applied to each. So, potentially I could create 100 different scenarios going from 1% to 99% through to 99% to 1%. So, that was my feedback to see.
So if I was asked a more detailed scenario, would we be able to produce that?
That would depend on the detail. Because the rating system is not set up to calculate rate capping or minimum rating at present. Therefore, you have to create a model to do that work outside of the system. So that's not something that I could do in-house.
I'll prepare a spreadsheet. The Council Tremble has prepared a spreadsheet. And we've done our own, but obviously that's not official. So therefore it's difficult to justify us presenting those to Council. I just want to have a do it.
Well, yeah. Obviously, when we do a full rate review, those are the sort of scenarios that we'd ask the consultant to prepare on your behalf.
So I don't want to next year.
If you want to have a full rate review, I would think yes. Unless you want to fund one now, we'll go out and try and find a consultant in short term to provide that information back to you.
But given that we'll be doing a full rate review next year and.
Yeah, I accept that. And what I was trying to do is actually start discussing with the community now options to consider when that full rate review is done. So they understood the processes that they went through and had questions and answers that we could work through this year. But I have to wait till next year or till next year.
Yeah, obviously a rate will be based on the site values and the current situation will be quite different to capital value rate scenario.
So it's the same process of raising funds. It's just the valuation system.
Yeah.
And we have the same budget project, so it's just another way to do it. Yeah, that's the answer, that's the answer.
Any other further questions without notice?
Yes, I do.
Councillor Laurie?
Yes. Rebecca got a reply from the Ombudsman this week regarding between myself and the ex-mayor. And I got a letter from Steve Gibbett 2-3 days ago, and I think he spoke to Rebecca regarding it, and I was a bit concerned that where in the letter it's got, I confirm I've spoken to you regarding this complaint and give the time to resolve the matter of journey. Well, that was false and wrong. I tried to fix the problem, but Sam was the one that didn't want to toe the part of the client. So if that letter's been sent off to the local governance panel, it's wrong, it needs fixing.
Councillor, I'll apologise for misunderstood information that was provided to me, but I can assure you that that letter has not been provided to me.
I'd just like to rectify it.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Laurie?
Yes.
So when will the issue be resolved?
It's been referred to the government panel for within their pathway.
And who referred? And who referred?
The admin there at the time.
Councillor Anderson, you have a question without notice?
Yes, I do. Late last year, it's been reported to me late last year, there was a meeting in Port Nim to discuss the CWMS scheme, and it's a public meeting organised by the mayor, and I understand the works manager was present, and we had an update.
I'm not aware of any meetings, about,
Sorry,
I'm not aware of any meetings.
I wasn't asking, I was asking.
There was no meeting held.
Okay, well, I'll get the information. We're going to present to.
Thank you. Any other questions? That not, Councillor? Okay, we'll move on, to item 10, petitions, if there are new. Motions on notice, 11 is new, and 12, council community committee report. 12.1 is the auditor committee report, which you have had the opportunity to have a look at. Number of comments or comments?
No, not the, recommendations of the, report we received, no.
Okay, so, would someone like to move that the minutes of the audit committee report of February be received and known? Thank you, Vicky. The second for that. Hannah, thank you. Moving on to 13.0. Oh, sorry. All those in favour of that motion? Thank you. Karen? 13.0 officers report. Yeah, so we have a late report which you have been provided regarding notice of council vacancy and election of a deputy mayor. We have an opportunity to read that report. We need to decide how we're going to, the recommendation is that we note the resignation of Councillor Hibbert, and we need to work a term of office for the position of deputy mayor. So that's the one that we would be electing tonight. And yes, I'll ask Beth to speak to that.
Okay, I think we've probably been through this a few times.
Before we move to that, can we just separate item 1 out of the motion, keep it separate? Otherwise, we note Councillor Hibbert's
Yes, absolutely.
resignation, and we thank him for his service to the community. And I move that as a motion.
Thank you, Robert. So Robert is moving that we accept the resignation of Councillor Hibbert.
No,
And,
I'll second.
and send a note of thank you to him. Vicky, can you- all those in favour of that motion? Thank you. So let's proceed with the recommendation for.
So, the recommendation then moves into determining a term for the office of the position of deputy mayor. Now, you can choose obviously any term up to the members of the town council. Just noting that if Mayor Telford is elected as the member for Flinders, come March, at that point in time, we will need to elect a new mayor. The deputy mayor does not automatically become the mayor at that point in time, so the deputy mayor can either remain the deputy mayor or they can be nominated as mayor at that time in March. So this position can be for the term of the council if you so wish. The method of electing that mayor, so it can be by show of hands or separate ballot. Obviously previously we've done separate ballot. So I just need you to adopt the either a professional, preferential or first past the post. Again, previously first past the post has been your choice. Appoint me as your returning officer. And then obviously if there's an equality or equal number of votes, then I will draw lots. That's the case. And whoever is the successful candidate will be elected to that position of deputy mayor upon that process being undertaken. So if you're happy to move that, we just need an indication of term and how the
Need to put a motion forward with the deputy mayor of the remainder of the term. And should that be a separate pack? I'll do that as a first. Same motion. I was going to say, do we have one for the term and one for the voting method? Two
Yeah,
separate motions?
we can do it all, we can fill this in and then do one.
Okay.
one.
I'll have to do a motion then that the term of the deputy mayor be for the remainder of the council term, so October of this year, and the method of voting be first past the close.
Are you happy to do it? Would you super ballots or show of hands today?
Secret ballot.
Ballots. Right, so just going to that.
We have item number 10. And I move that councillor Laurie be the street name.
I think, I don't know if that needs to be part of the motion. I think anybody that is nominated can
Sure.
appoint as revenue. If
Okay.
you're happy to take
Yep.
it that
I'll
way,
take it
rather
that way,
than
yep.
completing the motion.
Okay, is everyone familiar with the recommendations we have before us? Someone like to move, so,
Is someone happy to move
yeah, thank you.
that way?
And you have a second for that? Any, have that one along? Lauren, thank you. Okay, all those in favour of that? Thank you. Right. So I need, to move
To leave the meeting, I'll just call for nominations for deputy mayor.
I would like to nominate Hannah Alan Jordan for deputy mayor.
Councillor Alan Jordan, you have to accept that nomination. Any other nominations for deputy mayor?
Yes, I'd like to nominate councillor Randall.
Councillor Randall, do you accept that nomination?
Yes, I do.
Given there are two nominations, we will proceed to an election. I'll give you a piece of paper. You can write down your preferred candidate. I'll come and get you property. I'll bring the box around in a moment. That's right. I'll give you for scrutiny.
So where's the street?
When I'm counting them. Everybody's happy with that process? I'm getting your turn to remember to vote. Councillor Laurie, would you like to come up and review? I've got 5. Laurie? So Councillor Alan Jordan as the deputy mayor. And the deputy mayor with the current mayor on leave of absence.
All right, so, find my page number. Opening to page 12, sorry. I do it? Right, perfect. We are moving and checking that on the ballot. That Deputy Mayor Alan Gordon chaired sorry. What are we moving and seconding?
The nomination,
Oh, yeah, oh, sorry, yep, sorry, so I'm looking for a mover, that the nominations were brought forward and, that the vacancy is filled. Motion that is on the board. Mover, councillor Trimber, looking for a seconder.
I don't think we need to do that because it was in the 24. It's
The previous motion, did we do that last time?
not really nice. It's just wasn't drawn at that.
Yeah.
Should we note the outcome or something? Or some formal
I think
process?
once we move it, you know, it's done and dusted, we don't have to go back and recall things, so we just move it, second it, and let it carry, and
Point 9 is on the declaration for showing us the candidate appointed to the position of deputy mayor, and the showing of the office determined by the resolution. If you're all happy that that's been carried and that Hannah's going to be re-elected, everybody's comfortable with that approach?
I'm comfortable.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you,
So
everyone.
that's, all good, moving on to page 12, so we've got the CEO report, capital work. Any questions for the team about any of these numbers? If not, that one's just to be received for notice, so moving on. So we've got the CEO report on page 15. Nice and lengthy report from Rebecca on this one. Any questions there today? No questions? Yeah. Your report's on page 16.
I just, definitely that, yeah, the vote budget, what the outcome of the rain event. Had some good, you know, company, but Port Needle, all the there, they were very positive. In addition, the work very well, very well.
Councillor Randall, you have a question?
Yeah, a question about halfway down, the CEO says that while the extent of the damage and repairs costs are still being determined, it's likely the full cost will be more than $100,000. Will we update the price on that, or is it still current?
We'll have to revert to you at the next meeting
Sure.
with an update and a senior report at that.
So where would that money come from?
Well, that comes out of the budget because it's emergency spend.
So we've got money in the budget to spend over there?
Well, well, as it says here, there'll be other matters that will then have to
Yeah.
will be impacted.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, because it is emergency works and roads need to be maintained.
Don't have an issue with that, I just wonder where the money's going to come.
Yeah, it will obviously be budgeted expenditure.
Councillor Lloyd?
Yeah, I've got a problem with having the rain, so I know it's a fair bit of rain, they still don't seem to be working. Somehow or other, the drain should be all clear and kept clear. I heard council staff have planted reeds or whatever in the actual drains. I've got no problem cleaning the ponds. The only reason why the drains don't work is there's so much stuff getting caught in the reeds and they can't fly and it just backs up over the roads. And
All right, we'll check that one as a comment.
I just want to hear from Damien what he thinks that should be done. I just believe those drains should be kept clear and should be looked at twice a year to make sure they're completely clear of any folds in those drains.
we'll take that as a notice and we can come back to you with an explanation as to the purpose of those plants and drains.
So I did write here, what this is about there.
Councillor Randall?
I appreciate the update on the Grants Health Portal, both in this report and in the community newsletter. It's come to my attention that the reinforcing rods that we're using apparently are box steel, whereas the previous ones were galvanised. Does that meet the specifications that we have for our construction work?
Yeah, I'll just take that on notice as well. And come back to you.
So, do we have nine?
I'm not sure what the meaning of your question is. I can get some more information on that. I'm sorry.
Well, the question basically is steel reinforcing rods delivered on site, black steel, then we use galvanised iron. Galvanised iron previously.
So let me take that on notice. We'll send a response to that.
Okay. When they're responding, could you also supply me with information about the concrete that they're going to be used to stand quality concrete? Is it 50-year life or 100-year life?
All right, moving on to the next one. Thank you, report, Rebecca.
Well, that's how I come.
Sorry, you've spoken twice.
What's okay? I'm asking questions.
Okay. One more question. I did ask, is this the last one and moving on? Sorry, my bad.
I asked previously, the CEO in last meeting about at the bay. I still trying to work out in my own mind whether we have it at the bay celebration or whether Colour Tumbler is going to run all the events this year. Something to clarify.
Yeah, sorry, I think there's quite a bit of media about this, but Colour Tumbling Festival is just the broad festival name.
Yeah.
So it's more than just, obviously you'll have the wall painting,
Yeah.
but it encompasses Cruisy Car Club, at the bay, the fun run. What we were finding was there was some confusion in and around media, sponsorship, that sort of thing. So rather than have multiple names,
Yeah.
it was felt that it's become just Colour Tumbling Festival.
Yeah.
And everything falls under that. So it's just a broad name.
So when do we as a council make that decision?
Well, it was a decision that's been made and the mayor's spoken about it at length. I think it's probably been advised previously that was.
That's the question last meeting about that debate, because at that stage, there was in communities wide some confusion. Was that the bay government with it? And was Colour Tumbling government with it? I have no issues with that. It seems to me that Colour Tumbling now has become marketing tool for the event, and that's a choice. Again, I don't have an issue with it. I'm just trying to determine when and who made the decision to do it.
Now, I think, the Progress Association was clearly Colour Tumbling was their branding and they're happy to use it in a broader sense.
That's whether the councils.
So, well, I think that the issue there is that, to elicit funding and grants is easier and more well known from a brand perspective, and we're leveraging off that. But still have the base managed by the council. The fun run's managed by the people organising the fun run.
We get paid through sponsorship and grants, and I don't have an issue with that, because they're the ones that are accountable for the way they spend money. And my understanding is that the Scouts was $25,000 towards the program.
Yep, we also been taking some of that money as well. So you might, obviously with SAK Networks, providing the sponsorship, and Master Plan providing sponsorship that they, and so that gets applied to certain areas that we're organising. So Master Plan are sponsoring the expo.
So the money's coming to council, not the other company.
Yeah.
So that's where the activate process comes in.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Any other questions? Councillor
Yeah.
Member?
No mention of the fireworks in.
At the time I wrote this, I had read that point.
Yeah, oh, I get corrected, but yeah, I was surprised really.
I might have chosen not to put it in there because I don't think it's been announced at that point. Oh, wait. Here we go. You can see that by Bluegrass Concert Hall, there wasn't one, the fireworks display, so they're not, so it's one.
Okay, good. Yeah.
On there.
Yeah.
No, excellent.
Any last questions on the CEO report? Beautiful, take that as received and noted. On to page 21. A revocation of motion. Over to you, Barry.
I think it's a fairly self-explanatory paper. You've obviously been provided with some advice to support this paper by email. So I'll come back to you, Chair, to
Any questions? Councillor Laurie?
Yeah, I only realised yesterday to revoke this, I'm probably going to have to write a letter. It has to be here 3 days for council meeting, so revocation of the motion. There's 3 days notice, Grace, and I only realised that yesterday. So I think you should just let it go to the next meeting, and I'll write out a letter revoking my motion. Yeah.
otherwise you can revoke it based on this recommendation.
I don't think, it's actually, I have to give 3 days notice, so.
I have sought advice on whether I could do it through this process, and the advice that I was given was I could, but
Oh,
Yeah. We
yeah.
received some fairly lengthy correspondence on it late last week.
I thought we got that voice as well.
Yeah. So we're gonna move her in the room.
Sorry, question on this.
Question, sorry.
Just confirming that, once we potentially revoke this motion, because there were several motions made at the same time, two.
So they were separated, those two.
They
So
were.
this one is just for the first motion.
Yeah, because we introduced the second motion as a measure to the first motion.
Yeah, the second motion still stands as far as I know. It's just not the first one. Any further questions? No, I'm looking for a mover. Councillor Elliott, and a seconder.
Yeah.
Councillor Trember,
Move.
all in favour? Carried. Thank you. Page 23, this one's just for noting. I'm sure everyone has read it. Are there any questions? Sorry, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Given that I asked it to be on the agenda, I need to explain why. And I wanted to make sure, I didn't see a copy of the CEO's response to the on-the-spot chat again by the end of December. So I'm assuming that council submit all the requirements against it. And the reason I put it on the agenda is basically to say to the CEO, if we need more software or better computers or processes, so this never happens again, just ask the council for it, because it's important that when we work with our community, we do it properly and professionally. And quite clearly, the Ombudsman's report was highlighting some issues that we have in this council when we do it. I'm sure having it highlighted to us, because all of us learn something from the Ombudsman's report, that will move through. Thank you for putting that on.
Moving onwards. So page 48, we're going to jump through. This one's the decision. I'm happy to break for informal discussion on this one. There is a little bit of a chat if you'd like. Page 48. Or have I missed one? Sorry, guys. Have I missed one? I'm so sorry. Especially on the students' reports, and then, yeah, onto the auto sprint. If you don't want to break for discussion, that's fine too.
I'll just
Just
I've
know
got a
that.
couple of questions.
Yeah,
I have a bit of a concern about, using the right uranium, freezing, not uranium, about it. They're very,
point of order, the process of discussion, you need to suspend standing orders, standing meeting procedures, so we have a discussion.
sorry, my apologies. I am still learning,
No,
and I am
have
sorry.
your own, do just
So
advise us.
if everyone is happy to suspend,
On majority, we do.
majority, yeah. Yeah, I did believe, I thought I had the head nod from everyone. Okay, so I do
Well,
apologize.
this we don't do minutes.
Okay, no worries, so
I'm
we
just
just,
looking for the correct wording.
yeah,
Sorry.
beautiful.
I'm looking for the correct
Yeah, okay,
wording.
we suspend the meeting procedures.
All right, Councillor Elliott, sorry for that.
I was concerned about whether there'd be any damage to the runway or, that was, what my concerns were. I don't think we've had any problems with that up there. There is a Fox Council, with regards to labour and, I don't think we have a street sweep. We don't have a street sweep. Yeah. And I guess my main concern was having, the RFDS suspended, whatever if there were, and what was in place, for that, whether we have cabinet officers. So, anyway, this is the question in my mind about.
Just to give you some ideas, so room hire, would be $500 plus, obviously our staff time to then attend the event on a weekend, and to sweep the aerodrome. Otherwise, we can get Downer to both, provide the staff and the room and come up and sweep the aerodrome for that event. That would be $1,500. We do have $17,000 in our tourism budget at the moment, so we can, if you decide to go and approve this, we can access that money through that budget line. And you'd probably find that once we bring staff back on and pay them overtime, just as effective financially to have Downer undertake that work. RSD, Roadline Office Service, in this instance, would be notified and would land at Port Lincoln. And as I understand it, takes somewhere around 2 hours to activate the, according to the CEO of the Lower Air Health Network. Takes about 2 hours to get RFDS here as it is. So, taking somebody by ambulance down to Port Lincoln for that period of time would be the only option we would have.
I have a bit of a concern with that, recognising that our ambulance people volunteer, and the impulse on their time and what have you. But the conversation I had with them today is that that's why they have a captured person on the radio, that if there is a, becomes an emergency, that they can suspend it,
I would be PP aircraft or report cover range and take the airspace closure and monitoring, so they would provide that. I would be under
Yeah, but maybe I clarify a little bit. Firstly, I would probably advise that the sweeping be done by Downers, not by council staff, dry hiring of a sweeper and only train our people and run through the requirements for political safety is, not the way to do it, just so they do it. Council can provide your own reporting officer for the duration of the event, one the airband radio, you need to issue what they call a NOTAM, a notice to airmen, which places the aerodrome for the event. But we know within that for emergency access it would be available on a certain amount of notice. If the event had to be suspended, we have that based on the on site to do so. Alternatively, we get other aerodromes available.
Yeah, is it typical in Duke Bay and, Duke Bay. Is it typical that they will waive the high fee and also cover the cost, or is that the request in this instance? I'm just mindful that we've rejected some, requests from our local progress associations last year on budget terms.
Yeah.
And, donations, we would be mindful of the method it seems to be given to in this climate as a result.
Absolutely. That is my understanding of this way, and that's why they can make it financially viable, but that's the information provided to us. I haven't spoken to Pauline nor speaking myself, and checked that particular detail, obviously with a check that they're professional and it's a well-run event, as to what they've provided in regards to, support. I'd have to go back and check.
And how about, just amount, typically what we're giving across the district? Doing kind or other, or? Not the broad question.
I just, I suppose it's in a case by case basis. I don't think that's finding funding at the moment.
Different organisations get different assistance from the council, some of which is in the form of rate rebates, and the council provides supporting bodies to loan those properties, and give water subsidies to some sporting clubs. We also get ad hoc requests.
I guess I'm concerned if we generally without paying money for another organisation to hold an event rather than waive fees.
One consideration is that, sporting clubs, and other groups can become involved, and institutions are all something similar. So I suppose looking at it slightly more broadly, but, and how they can leverage off the event. She obviously, I think previously decided not to support it, and that's absolutely fine as well. Councillor Roy?
Has anyone possibly got a cost actual council as a rough figure or more?
To have our staff there.
Yeah, to be involved with this event as a staff, or actual council's total cost.
So it would be $1,500 to Dana and about $2,000.
I just, in the state of our budget, we've got to find savings somewhere, even though it's only $2,000. So it is a starting point to try and cut some of our costs down. I'd probably like the event, but I think they should help pay for the costs, and it shouldn't be up to us, I don't think. I know they came to us 2-3 years ago, didn't they? We gave the same thing, I think they said here, because the costs passed on to the council were too high. I still kind of agree that's what we should be doing. Yeah.
Is there any more appetite for a further discussion, or are we going to a motion? Where are we at? Yeah, so like Bex just discussed and like the motion states, so we can break that up into sections. We can approve the event, and they can pay the fee themselves. We can put it all together. It's up to you guys. So, are you guys ready to come out of?
Review.
Are you happy to review?
Yeah.
Right, so we're looking for a motion. Councillor Trembo,
I'm happy to move a motion that council support the event by waiving the requirement for a facility hire fee and leave it at that. Well, we don't pay any further costs. They can contact them. That's how much consider the waiver fee, hire fee only.
So looking for a second on that motion? No seconders? Any further motions? No. Okay. So that lapses the seconders. So do we just leave that as that, and you'll get in contact with them to say that we were unsupported?
Well, we haven't, I'm probably going to make a motion to say that we're not approving the request. We're really ready for that, once we accept the motion that somebody's going to put up. They have made a formal request to the council, so we're doing it for that.
Have that motion, it's like what? And then, the second.
No, I'll move that we don't set the, auto spot, auto pump request for the use of the air coming down. Is that what we're looking for?
Yeah, so that council
Do
do not support the,
the auto spot pump request that is one for Norway Street.
sorry, what was that? I struggle with these masks, I'm so sorry.
That we don't support the EP auto pumps use of Thunder Bay aerodrome for auto sprint. Because I believe you could have, you know, I realise I'd be looking at it the RFPS plankton, and sometimes you get 2-3 times a day.
Yeah.
You just don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, put stuff there, depend up completely, but,
Just up to you.
Area Street Club. Club's use, of the aerodrome event. That's what Councillor Laurie has said. Councillor Laurie, are you happy with that motion? Yeah, absolutely.
Council does not support the request of Tumby Bay Auto Sprint Club, to use the Tumby Bay aerodrome.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
To use,
EP, not Tumby Bay Auto Sprint Club. Sorry. Yeah.
sorry, it's also support the club as well.
there's an aerodrome for their moto, or the auto sprint event.
To use the Tumby Bay aerodrome. Or a Tumby Bay Auto Sprint event.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Laurie? Yeah, have I got a seconder for that motion? Councillor Trimble? Thank you. All in favour? Carried. Thank you, guys. Alright, moving on to page 53, the deputy CEO, infrastructure asset management plan review. Down over you.
Okay, so the council has met over the past couple of months, so December and January, to review their asset management plans and do their annual review of their asset management plans and the long-term financial plan. There was no change suggested or requested for the fund equipment asset management plan, and the only change for the building and structure one was the removal of the Humpy Bay master plan project
Oh, yes.
from that plan, which is highlighted in the summary on the next page. Council can wait until they've done a public consultation, or if they choose to do a public consultation on the long-term financial plan review. You can wait until after that to adopt these reports if you wish. If you feel there may be some changes as a result of those, otherwise they'll be adopted.
Very good. Have we got any questions? I feel like there's been a fair amount of workshops along the way with this. I think it's a pretty good report in terms of reading wise. It's pretty easy to get through. Josh? Any questions? Sorry, Councillor Laurie?
I've got one. Because we haven't decided to do what we want with that $693,000 yet.
That's later on in the report, please.
Yeah, I realise that. I'm just saying that whether we're going to spend it on infrastructure or what, we really have to get moving to find out what we want to do with it. Could make a difference to the asset management plan.
Yeah.
I think we really got to get a hurry up and find out what we want to do with that one.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a bit later in the report. But have you got a question for us, Bob?
No, I just thought it could, whatever we decide to do, it could affect the management plan. That's right.
You can do. I mean, I'm happy to wait, and if the council makes that decision at tonight's meeting, I can add that into the plan and bring it back when you consider your commentary from the long-term financial plan and market.
Yeah.
It won't be difficult to add whatever project you decide to use that money on the plan.
Yeah, just we should really go ahead and order what we're going to spend money on one area. We haven't done that yet.
Next one. So we've got the recommendation in front of us that the council would like to review.
We're going to do what we've just discussed in relation to what Laurie said, that punishment would be.
No, you wouldn't. Have you got an appetite to want to?
So it could be that, you can just put a comment there if you wish that, the plans lay on the table until, the consideration of the market. Or for review, subject to a decision on the phase 3 funding from RCLI.
Is there an appetite for that?
I'd like
Somebody like to have a motion for this to lay on the table until the next, or just to lay on the table?
I'd like to make a motion. I hope we can get our act in order tonight, or try and work out meeting dates so we can get that money finalised with how we're going to spend it.
Okay, so,
Says it lay on the table, subject to a decision on the RCLI phase 3 funding. Is that appropriate?
Let's go and find that. Motion is that the recommendation lay on the table. Subject to,
Not the recommendation, it's not the
oh, the
report.
report.
Yeah. The decision on the report, however you want to word it, it's really up to council Warwick, how it's-
Subject to decision of CRIP phase 3. Councillor Laurie, you happy with that, Ruben?
Yes.
We have a second to that motion. Councillor Elliott? All in favour? Carried. Alright, skipping to page 117, long-term financial plan.
Yes, so this is, so following on from, once again, the meetings that council held in December and January in relation to, changes for the review of the long-term financial plan for the remainder of the plan. There was a number of items discussed. The main items suggested for change was the council was keen to, well, obviously the indexation was changed in the plan in the first instance, and the indexation in the plan was 2.5% in the first year and then 3% thereafter, which is obviously an estimate of what inflation may do. However, what I can add is that since those discussions, the Adelaide CPI for the December 12 months is now 3.3%. So effectively it's gone from last quarter being 2.5 for 12 months to now 3.3 for 12 months. And all indications and commentary are that it's holding up. So quite possibly could be higher again come March, and the end of the March quarter, so the 12 months of the March quarter. Council's revised plan, which I've prepared based on the request of council, includes CPI plus 4% for the first 4 years to reach a break-even position in the 25-6 financial year. I don't think there's a need to change the indexation in the plan. I think, you can be running around chasing your tail to keep updating that. It's more the principle that council will have to consider if this plan, and staff also suggested that this plan be put out in public consultation for 21 days, and that wasn't a suggestion so far through the process, but we believe that it is a significant change what was in the original plan. It's put out to public consultation. Council should get some feedback on what they're proposing, and then we can make it, and then council can make a decision at the last meeting. Having said that, if council were to continue the proposal after the consultation of a CPI plus an amount increase, then when we come to draft the budget, council need to consider whether they would then apply that increase to the CPI that is the most current figure at our availability, which will be March quarter come that time. The draft plan has been prepared. The review document has been prepared in the same manner as previous review documents for our long-term financial plans. So basically, the original plan, along with the comment in relation to the review that was just undertaken, and to try and explain the changes that are implemented in the financial plan, as well as an updated version of the financial statements and the financial indicators that come out of the draft plan as presented.
Any questions? Councillor Randall?
We're going into public consultations. I assume that we're going to use our policy. We're going into public consultation to follow that forward.
That's a bit of a tough one, because policy is not descriptive in that it says you must do this or you must do that. It gives like policy guidelines. If you go for any more than 21 days, you won't be able to have the decision at the March council meeting. So if you want to put it out for longer than that, I don't personally have a problem.
I'm not asking for longer, I'm just asking what are you going to do?
So it will be advertised you can outline it if you like, you've got proposals, so you can outline what you've done.
So, in accordance with our policies, I'll advertise with the Port Lincoln Times,
Yep.
EP Advocate,
Yep.
our website,
Yep.
and other social media outlets. If you choose to go to Gazette or anything, I guess
That's all I need to know.
have our newsletter as
And a
well.
date when that will happen.
If you approve this tonight,
Yep.
or I'll get it done, it'll be in Thursday's paper. So it gives us 21 days.
So the 21 days to finish on, if you allow one day for the advert to finish on Friday before the council meeting, so it'll have to be a late before the council meeting, which will basically be a presentation of the public commentary that come back to us, along with copies of the submissions that there are.
I'm happy to move the recommendation. And I'd like to add a second recommendation.
Do that.
That the CEO provide a copy of the long-term financial plan. To the Local Government Finance Authority. And request an indication of council's borrowing capacity measured against the long-term financial plan.
So should we have just in front of that, the draft of their financial plan?
Sure.
Yeah, because it's in draft.
Yeah, sure.
form at the moment.
Final sentence would be that the response be presented to the March meeting.
Got a question.
Yeah.
Generally, last year they were sometime in April.
What I would like to see is, I'm not happy with 7% rate rise, but I've got to go along with it. I would like to see us go 7%, adopt the new valuations and don't muck around providing the multiplied back through valuations to get a rate in dollars. Just go 7%. The rate in the dollars what we've got now, and I'd like to know what extra we would pick up by just adopting the valuation. Because it could make effect to this. And this is where we went wrong. 7, 8
We
years
won't
ago.
be able to get that number quickly because we get the valuations in April. Julie then has to load them into the system and get them to balance. And then at that stage, we can start doing potentially some calculation scenarios on the current format of rating. So on the bulk sum of the individual groups, so the total valuation of the individual groups, that's quite easy to model. But if we start making it more intricate than that, it becomes quite problematic to model in a good time frame. So basically, if you were to say to me, once we get the valuations, you want to raise 7%, we can probably talk about this more at the March meeting, because it won't be until after that.
Sure, it's applicable to the annual business plan.
It will be, yes, and
That's what it goes, sure.
yeah, what I was going to go on to say was that once we adopt this at the March meeting, we'll be then looking to get an early meeting happening for the draft budget, and at that time I'll need some indication from the council of how they wish to apply the rate increase. Because if we leave it any later than April, we can't, in-house, we can't model that sort of stuff. Like there are a number of variations in a short time frame, because we've also got all the other workloads that come at that time of year, which is, through the budget and adoption and all that sort of stuff. An early indication, you can't say this is what we're going to do, but you can give me an indication of what you're thinking you're going to do, and then we can go away and try and bring something back for consideration. Ultimately, you don't make the final decision on how you're going to rate until you adopt the budgeted rates at, July or August. But the earlier we can start that process, the better chance we've got of providing meaningful information back. But it's all held up, the bottleneck point is the balancing of the value of the evaluation from the system.
Councillor Randall, sorry, are you happy with your motion?
Yep, you've got a motion
Yeah,
there.
and you're happy how it reads?
Yep.
You're happy to move that?
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
I'm moving.
Can I call for a seconder on that?
I think we should let me speak first and then call for something.
Sorry, my apologies on that one.
Well, basically, this council, from time to time has received information back saying, when we go to our borrowings that we're getting near our limit. I just want to make sure when they assess our long-term financial plan, that we do have some capability of borrowing some money in the future, because that will be our guide to what we do as far as projects in the city. It's a bit like the homeowner who wants to buy a house. They go to the bank and see how much they can borrow, and then adjust their budget accordingly. So it's really just that step that I'm trying to initiate at this stage, so that's some information.
And I think what their previous responses have been, when they first came back to me for that extra information, what they put a heavy emphasis on was what had we adopted in the past, and had we stuck to that? And so I guess they'll sort of temper their response by saying, well, we think this is this good, but it's only this good if you do it.
Well, that's our commitment,
Yeah.
to lock ourselves into the long-term plan.
Yeah.
Because we can't afford to miss around.
No, right, if you have some information.
Seconder, Councillor Chamber, do you want to speak on the motion?
Yes, please. Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea. I hope the last 10 years are easy to go by, that we're not marked on how well it's stuck to for the next 10 years, applying to them annually. But yeah, no, I think it'll be good to get that information back.
Yeah. Anyone else want to speak on the motion? No. All those in favour? Carried. Yes. So just a report on page 136 for noting. Any questions to Gina on this one?
I can provide some brief commentary first if you like.
Yeah.
You will notice there that the number is quite low, and therefore you may question the expected earnings being as high as what the bonus from the LGFA for 21-22, and I believe with that we potentially may even be slightly over what budget.
Any further questions on that one, or are we happy to move on? Happy to move on? All right, page 138. Page 3, Local Roads Community Infrastructure Funding Allocation for Decision. Right. Over to Dan.
So I was asked to put this report to you this month so that you can make some decision or at least have some discussion on the allocation of phase 3 funding for the LRCIP program. I've tried to outline some of the works that you previously considered or discussed, and I've repeated my recommendation that you received in December, which is to allocate the total of the allocation of 697,488 towards the required maintenance works on the Tommy Bay and Portland jetties. I don't have much more to add. It's probably a good discussion.
Any questions on that one? Councillor Laurie?
Yes, it's more than me. I believe we should work out what we want to do with that money, and we haven't decided yet. And we really should be going to the public to find out whether they want the jetties fixed up or what. We really should be getting advice from the public what we want to do, and we got to do it pretty quick, because I've got my idea that I'd like to see how to do it, but I want to listen to the public first to see whether they want their jetties fixed and tell them the plan of what the government kind of told us regarding the future of the jetties. Yeah, take it from there, but it needs doing very quickly. And we need to really sort this money out.
I don't agree. Any other questions?
It's councillor moving that as a motion. Moving that as a motion.
It was one of Bob's special questions, I believe.
Sorry?
It's one of Bob's special questions.
Because I've heard that said before, on the council earlier, since 2 years ago, so I can't go to the public to talk. Is anybody going to move that motion or not?
I think,
Although, I'll move that we call an urgent meeting with the public to discuss the future of our jetties and the future costing of the Tundy Bay foreshore, where $600,000 would be allocated to fix the foreshore.
can I just get you to hold that thought point really quickly back? Just wanted to say something when you started speaking through, sorry.
I think what needs to be recognised is that we've obviously had the engineers' reports on those 2 jetties, and they have given us a very clear indication that to have those jetties remain open in certain weather events and for the safety of our community, that we need to do this work. I'm not sure if as elected members going out to your community to ask them about works on a jetty subject to an engineering report that obviously had provided to you, that they may not quite understand from the perspective of what's required and why, is a useful approach. When you've obviously been provided with all of that engineering information already. The approach that the state government's taking is quite independent of this, and this needs to occur in more than 5 years. So I'm not sure that, yeah.
It's clear to the council that we have the ability to make decisions on where we spend the money and how we spend it. And it has been suggested a number of times that we should at least talk to the community about the money and whether we should be updating the jetty or doing something else at the foreshore. Former councillor Hibbert was strong on the foreshore. I mean, we at least need to communicate with the community about what we plan to do. And as I understand it, the applications don't close until June, and the work can't start until after June anyway. So we've got a little bit of time when we go talk to the community about it. I think we owe it to the community, A, to tell them about the jetty, what's happening, and B, to get a feeling for what we should be doing. Should we be spending money on the jetty, or should we be doing something else on the foreshore?
Can I ask a question then of, would you be content with a survey that went out? No. No? That might be it. I just wanted to.
You got to talk to the community.
Yeah. Yeah, and I believe that that's why we got voted in, was to talk to the community about what they are passionate about. Instead of needing to go to public meetings.
Yeah, I just think we should go to the public regardless. So I've got my opinion of what I want done, and it's probably not what Damon recommended. So I'd like to put it to the community, you know, these different propositions at the same.
I just to see a bit of a problem with that in terms of gauging everyone's view when you've got potentially 100 passionate people in the hall, wherever it may be. Whereas if you do something like a survey or public consultation where people can pop in submissions and we can actually gauge the information that we receive, does that make a bit of sense?
We could do all of the above.
We could, absolutely. The world's our oyster, we could. But time is money also. And the more that we ask our staff to do things, it is also, wages. So it's also another consideration. So
Just quickly, because we've only got the 697,000 to spend. So, and that's purely for repair works.
Yep.
Anything else over and above that that sits with the state government is a different conversation.
Yep.
That you would need the state government to provide to the community.
Yeah. My understanding also was that we as a council weren't going to put any money into other than 697,000. So we're going to using our reserve funds or anything like that, we should
No.
keep it 697,000.
Yes,
So I
That's the
actually-
recommendation.
that is the
Yeah.
recommendation that's in front of us, is to use
Yeah,
that
so the
money
community
for
needs to
those
know
activities.
that it's ratepayers, taxpayers' money. Let's come and have a go at spend it. I'm going to spend it on upgrading the jetty, as known as your committee. Or you're going to say, don't spend it on that, spend it on the bush. We have to make a decision. here.
As long as the council is aware that if this money isn't outlaid, then there is a chance that we will have to close the jetty
When's that likely?
in line with weather events because it is unsafe.
That's quite clear in that after.
Yeah, sure. And that's the community needs to know. They need to know what we're closing.
Yeah, and I discussed that with my community, and I hope other councillors around the table too.
So when we close the jetty, like you said.
We haven't advocated closing the jetty, we're just seeking further direction or direct money.
I just want to make sure that we're not putting good money in after bad money. And it's a fair lump of sum of money we're putting into that project. As I said, I've got different views of what I feel should happen to the jetty. And now's as good a time as any to just hand it back to the government, so here. You've got an election coming up in a month and a half. See what they have to say.
Where we're going to go with this.
We just passed a motion previously that we would get a decision on this so that we can make a decision on the asset plans and that. So if you were going to consult on this and you still wanted to maintain that time frame, you have to do that for consultation in 21 days.
Is that achievable?
Yes, achievable.
Well, I don't think council staff is giving the paper.
Pretty good.
It's out of course. Probably. Deputy chair, deputy mayor, chair, it's probably there.
Madam Mayor, I'll move a motion if you want me to. I'll move that we have a public consultation with the public regarding what we intend to do with the company going forward in the jetties.
Are you wanting to do, is it about the jetties or is it about the allocation of those funds?
They both come in.
I think that's correct. It's about how we spend that money.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're saying the jetties, then you're not talking about sports.
We've got some money to spend. How do you want us to spend it? And why not tell us to fix up the road instead?
And yeah, I just want the public to know, what state the jetty's in. That a lot of people don't know. And whether we're prepared to buy what we got or fix it or what, I don't know. It's a lot of money to spend on one project.
What's the money?
A lot of money to spend when we have a budget. A lot of money to spend. It's going to be a band-aid. A band-aid is fit. Not knowing what the outcome. I mean, I just hope the meeting doesn't end in a free-for-all. I think I'll be really happy at the information and, be very clear about what the meeting is about.
So, you'd like to call a public meeting, provide information, what they're saying. Happy with that change, Councillor Lloyd?
Yes.
Motion. Councillor Corley. Provide information. Community. Council proposes. Allocate. the local roads and community infrastructure program. Phase 3 allocation.
The application of 197,000.
Allocation of 197,497 or 88.
All right, have I got a second for that motion? Councillor Elliott, sorry, just wait you guys, please.
You also need to know where the money is spent certain costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're before we start.
Yeah. Fact that this, how many meetings that we've had as a room on this topic, and the length of time and how difficult it's been to arrive at a conclusion. I don't think we will have any more luck in the community forum without all the background information. I really don't think we'll be able to get that information across in a way that's valuable to the community in the time frame that we have, and use that information to then make a decision. I'm being really pragmatic about it, if I'm honest. I do think we need to get the information out to them. I do think they should be allowed to have a say. I just don't know how much value looking at it. I don't need to do that with the time frame.
Would the member like to speak? No? Would you like to speak on the motion?
Not really, it's pretty self-explanatory. We actually, when we, started talking about the allocation of 697,000, good argument, can of worms of everywhere where you could spend it, but I've got no problem with that.
And the second,
Not on.
any in favour? Carried. On to page 141, verification of community land.
So that one conflict of interest, sorry, two conflicts of interest, 133.
Interesting to you.
And so we still have four councillors in the room, members of the day quorum.
For this one, any questions, Emma? Discussion detail from Emma?
Yeah, so just quick explanation on this one, as explained in the report, the Sunday hotel owners have, requested from Crown Lands to use the laneway adjacent to their hotel, for, refurbishment as a drive-through bottle shop. So Crown Lands, dedicated to council for public laneway access, and by default it is community land. So Crown Lands Department has started their process and happy to work with the applicant on leasing the land, but we just need to do our bit in the work with community land dedication, so they can continue working with the applicant to look at the terms of the lease. The two attachments to show the area that we're talking about, and small parts of laneway driveway.
Questions from Councillor Laurie?
Yes, that's only that parcel land, isn't it? And
Yes, yep,
that's it.
so the blue area highlighted.
Why don't we put the proposition of they buy it from the Crown? It just seems to be absolute waste, isn't it, really? That we can't do anything with it, can we?
Yep, so my discussion with the Crown Lands Department has been that they've had that discussion with the applicant of whether purchase or lease is a better arrangement. And yeah, I'm not privy to what the details of that, but I think it's come down to cost. That a 30-year lease is more cost effective for that.
It just seems to be useless for the land there, but
Yeah.
that's where the road used to go.
Yeah, so we just need a recommendation move to start that community land application process.
I'll move that then, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Elliott to second. Any further discussion? discussion on that one? Nice and easy, all those in favour? Wonderful, carried. Thank you so much. Councillor Franklin.
Good time.
Yeah, see.
We're on to page 145, order to exclude the public. Very sorry, can have to get off on this one.
And they were only just do 148 and do that.
Sorry, have six months?
No, just the next one's, transfer station. Just-
No,
No, that one is,
That's what's in public.
Yeah, that's the
yeah, that one's the confidential one. We need a mover and a seconder to go into confidence. Councillor Elliott and Councillor Pembroke, all those in favour? Beautiful, thanks gallery, thanks for attending.
What's that one?
Nearly forgot. That's cutting away. Yeah, it's just getting turned off now. Thanks, guys. A little bit. Like, are they still there? Are they still watching?
that the stream's finished.
Let's turn it off.
Yeah, 2 o'clock.
Just in case.
We should be recording.
Yeah, certainly. Calling. We'll never recording.